first thank you for yours, Senator Klobuchar. Senator Hirono.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Smith, it's good to see you again. So every time we have one of these hearings, we learn something new, but the conclusion I've drawn is that AI is ubiquitous. Anybody can use AI. It can be used in any endeavor. So when I hear you folks testifying about how we shouldn't be taking half measures, I'm not sure what that means. What does it mean not taking half measure on something as ubiquitous as AI, where there are other regulatory schemes that can touch upon those endeavors that use AI? So, there's always the question I have of when we address something as complex as how AI is looking, that there are unintended consequences that we should care about. Would you agree? Anybody? Mr. Smith?
I would absolutely agree. I think we have to define what's a full measure and what's a half measure, but I bet we can all agree that half measures are not good enough.
Well, that is the thing, how to recognize, going forward, what is actually going to help us with this powerful tool. So I have a question for you, Mr. Smith. It is a powerful tool that can be used for either good, or it can also be used to spread a lot of disinformation and misinformation, and that happened during the disaster on Maui. And Maui residents were subject to disinformation, some of it coming from foreign governments, i.e. Russia, looking to sow confusion and distrust, including don't sign up for FEMA because they cannot be trusted. And I worry that with AI, such information will only become more rampant with future disasters. Do you share my concern about misinformation in the disaster context and the role AI could play? And what can we do to prevent these foreign entities from pushing out AI disinformation to people who are very vulnerable?
I absolutely share your concern. And I think there's two things we need to think about doing. First, let's use the power of AI as we are to detect these kinds of activities when they're taking place, because they can enable us to go faster, as they did in that instance where Microsoft, among others, used AI and other data technologies to identify what people were doing. Number two, I just think we need to stand up as a country and with other governments and with the public and say there need to be some clear red lines in the world today, regardless of how much else or what else we disagree about. When you think about what happens typically in the wake of an earthquake or a hurricane or a tsunami or a flood, the world comes together. People are generous. They help provide relief. And then let's look at what happened after the fire in Maui. It was the opposite of that. We had some people, not necessarily directed by the Kremlin, but people who regularly spread Russian propaganda, trying to discourage the people of Lahaina from going to the agencies that could help them. That's inexcusable. And we saw what we believe is Chinese-directed activity trying to persuade the world in multiple languages that the fire was caused by the United States government itself using a meteorological weapon. Those are the things that we should all try to bring the international community together and agree they're off limits.
Well, how do we identify that this is even occurring, that there is, China or Russia directed misinformation going on? How do we? I didn't know this was happening, by the way, and even in the Energy Committee on which I sit, we had people testify, and I asked, regarding the Maui disaster, I asked one of the testifiers whether he was aware that there had been disinformation put out by a foreign government in that example, and he said yes, but I don't know that the people of Maui recognized that that was going on. So how do we, one, even identify that that's going on, and then to come forward and say this is happening, and to name names, identify which country it is that is spreading this kind of disinformation and misinformation?
I think we have to think about two things. First, I think we at a company like Microsoft have to lean in, and we are, with data, with infrastructure, with experts, and real-time capability to spot these threats, find the patterns, and reach well-founded conclusions. And then the second thing, this is the harder thing, this is where it's going to need all of your help. What do we do if we find that a foreign government is deliberately trying to spread false information next year in a Senate or presidential campaign about a candidate, how do we create the room so that information can be shared and people will consider it?
Yes.
You all, with this, the most important word in your framework is bipartisan. How do we create the bipartisan framework so that when we find this, we create a climate where people can listen? I think we have to look at both of those parts of the problem together.
Well, I hope we can do that. And Mr. Chairman, if you don't mind, one of the concerns about AI from the worker standpoint is that their jobs will be gone. And Professor Herzog, you mentioned that that generative AI can result in job losses. And for both you and Mr. Smith, what are the kinds of jobs that will be lost to AI?
That's an excellent question. It's difficult to project that into the future, but I would start with saying that not necessarily something that can be automated effectively, but things that I think that those that control the purse strings think could be automated effectively. And if it gets to the point where it appears as though it could, I imagine you'll see industry move in that direction.
Mr. Smith, I think you mentioned in your book, which I am listening to, that things like ordering something out of a drive-through, that those jobs could be gone to AI.
Yeah, I was 4 years ago, we published our book with my co-author behind me, and we said, what's the first job that we think might be eliminated by AI? We don't have a crystal ball, but I bet it's taking an order in the drive-through of a fast food restaurant. You're not really establishing a rapport with the human being. All the person does is listen and type into a computer what you're saying. So when AI can hear as well as a person, it can enter that in. And indeed, I was struck a few months ago, Wendy's, I think it was, announced that they were starting to consider whether they would automate with AI the drive-through. I think there's a lesson, though, in that. And it should give us both pause, but I think a little bit of optimism. There's no creativity involved in a drive-through, at least, listening and entering an order. There are so many jobs that do involve creativity. So the real hope, I think, is to use AI to automate the routine, maybe even the work that's boring, to free people up so they can be more creative, so they can focus more on paying attention to other people and helping them. And if we just apply that recipe more broadly, I think we might put ourselves on a path that's more promising.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Horner. Senator Kennedy.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for calling this hearing. Mr. Daly, am I saying your name correctly, sir?
That's correct.
Yes. Mr. Daly, if I am a recipient of content created by generative AI, do you think I should have a right to know that content was generated by a robot?
Yes, I think you do. I think the details would depend on the context, but in most cases, I think, okay. I or anybody else, if I receive something, I'd like to know, is this real or was this generated?
Mr. Smith?
Generally, yes. What I would say is, if you're listening to an audio, if you're watching a video, if you're seeing an image and it was generated by AI, I think people have a right to know. The one area where I think there's a nuance is if you're using AI to, say, help you write something. Maybe it's helping you write the first draft. Just as I don't think any of us would say that when our staff helps us write something, we're obliged to give the speech and say, now I'm going to read the paragraph that my staff wrote. You make it your own. And I think the written word is a little more complex, so we need to think that through. But as a broad principle, I agree with that principle.
Professor?
There are situations where you probably wouldn't expect to be dealing with the product of generative AI, and in those instances...
Well, that's the problem.
Right. But as times change, it's possible that our expectations change, and so...
But as a principle, do you think that people should have a right to know when they're being fed content from generative AI?
I tell my students it depends on the context. Generally speaking, if you're vulnerable to generative AI, then the answer is absolutely yes.
What do you mean if you're vulnerable?
So there may be
I'm
situations.
just looking for,
Sure.
no disrespect,
No, not at all.
a straight answer.
Absolutely.
I kind of like, I like two things,
listen.
breakfast food and straight answers.
I love them.
And if a robot is feeding me information and I don't know it's a robot, am I entitled to know it's a robot as a consumer? Pretty straight up.
Yeah, I think the answer is yes.
All right.
In a lot of
Start back with Mr. Dowley. Am I entitled to know who owns that robot and where that content came from? I know it came from a robot, but somebody had to goose the robot to make it give me that content. Am I entitled as a consumer to know who owns the robot?
I think that's a harder question that depends on the particular context. I think, if somebody is feeding me a video and it's been identified as being generated by AI, I now know that it's generated, it's not real. If it's being used, for example, in a political campaign, then I would want to know who
But let me stop you.
informed it.
Let's suppose I'm looking at a video and it was generated by a robot. Would it make any difference to you whether that robot was owned by, let's say, President Biden or President Trump? Don't you want to know in evaluating the content who owns the robot and who prompted it to give you this information?
I would probably want to know that. I don't know that I would feel it would be required for me to know that.
How about you, Mr. Smith?
I'm generally a believer in letting people know not only that it's generated by a computer, but who owns the program that's doing it. The only qualification I would offer, and it's something you all should think about and would know better than me, there are certain areas in political speech where one has to decide whether you want people to act with anonymity. The Federalist Papers were first published under a pseudonym. And I think in the world today, I'd rather have everybody know who's speaking.
Okay,
But you should think about it.
Professor?
I'm afraid I'm going to disappoint you again, Senator, with a not straight answer, but I agree.
How do you feel about breakfast food?
Right. I am pro breakfast food.
Okay.
So we agree on that. I agree with Mr. Smith. I think that there are circumstances where you'd want to preserve anonymous speech, and there are some where you absolutely would want to know who.
Okay. Well, I'm not. I don't want to go too over. Obviously, this is an important subject, and the extent to which I think. Let me rephrase that. The extent of most senators' knowledge in terms of the nuances of AI. Their general impression is that AI has extraordinary potential to make our lives better if it doesn't make our lives worse first. And that's about the extent of it. In my judgment, we're not nearly ready to be able to craft a bill that looks like somebody designed it on purpose. I think we're more likely to take baby steps. And I ask you those questions predictably because Senator Schatz and I have a bill. It's very simple. It says if you own a robot that's going to spit out artificial content to consumers, consumers have the right to know that it was generated by a robot and who owns the robot. And I think that's a good place to start. But again, I want to thank my colleagues here, my chair and my ranking member. They know a lot about this subject, and I want to hear their questions too. Thank you all for coming.
Thank you, Senator Kennedy. On behalf of the chairman, we're going to start a second round, and I guess I'll go first since I'm the only one sitting here. It's bad news for the witnesses.
Well, I came to hear you.
Oh, no, I'm sure.
I mean it.
Yeah. Let me just, Mr. Smith, let me come back to this. We were talking about kids and kids' privacy and safety. Thanks for the information you're going to get me. Let me give you an opportunity, though, to maybe make a little news today in the best possible way. 13, the age limit for Bing's Chat, that's such a young age. I mean, listen, I've got 3 kids at home, 10, 8, 2 are my kids. I don't want my kids to be interacting with chatbots anytime soon at all, but 13 is so incredibly young. Would you commit today to raising that age? And would you commit to a verifiable age verification procedure such that parents can know, they can have some sense of confidence that their 12-year-old is not just saying to Bing, yeah, I'm 13. Yeah, I'm 15. Sure, go right on ahead. Now let's get into it back and forth with this robot, as Senator Kennedy said. Would you commit to those things on behalf of child safety today?
Look, as you can imagine, the teams that work at Microsoft let me go out and speak, but they probably have one principle they want me to remember. Don't go out and make news without talking to them first.
But you're the boss.
Yeah, let's just say wisdom is important, and most mistakes you make when you make them by yourself. I'm happy to go back and talk more about what the right age should be.
Don't you think 13 is awfully low, though?
It depends for what, actually.
To interact with a robot who could be telling you to do any number of things. Don't you think that's awfully young?
Not necessarily. Let me describe
Really?
the scenario. When I was in Seoul, Korea, a couple of months ago, we met with the Deputy Prime Minister, who's also the Minister of Education. And they're trying to create, for 3 topics that are very objective, math, coding, and learning English, a digital textbook with an AI tutor. So that if you're doing math and you don't understand a concept, you can ask the AI tutor to help you solve the problem. And by the way, I think it's useful not only for the kids, I think it's useful for the parents. And I think it's good. Let's just say a 14-year-old. Let's say, what's the age of 8th grade algebra? Most parents, I found when my kids were in 8th grade algebra, I tried to help them with their homework. They didn't believe I ever made it through the class. I think we want kids in a controlled way with safeguards to use something that way.
But we're not talking here about tutors. I'm talking about your AI chat, Bing Chat. I mean, famously earlier this year, your chatbot, you had a technology writer for the New York Times who wrote about this. I'm looking at the article right now. Your chatbot was urging this person to break up his marriage.
I'm not
Do we
sure.
want 13-year-olds to be having those conversations?
No, of course not.
Okay.
Which is
well, will
why
you commit to raising the age?
I don't want Bing Chat to break up anybody's marriage.
I don't either.
So, but that.
There may be some exceptions.
Yeah, but we're not going to make the decision on the exception. No, but it goes to we have multiple tools. Age is a very red line.
It is a very red line. That's why I like it.
And my point is, there is a safety architecture that we can apply to bring them.
But your safety architecture didn't stop an adult, didn't stop the chatbot from having this discussion with an adult in which it said, you don't really love your wife. Your wife isn't good for you. She doesn't really love you. Now, can you imagine? This is an adult. Can you imagine the kind of things that your chatbot would say to a 13-year-old? I mean,
Well,
I'm serious about this. Do
no.
you really think this is a good idea?
Yeah, but look, wait a second. Let's put that in context. At a point where the technology had been rolled out for only 20,000 people, a journalist for the New York Times spent 2 hours on the evening of Valentine's Day ignoring his wife and interacting with a computer, trying to break the system, which he managed to do. We didn't envision that use, and by the next day we had fixed it.
Are you telling me that you've envisioned all the questions that 13-year-olds might ask, and that I, as a parent, should be absolutely fine with that? Are you telling me that I should trust you in the same way that the New York Times writer did?
What I am saying is, I think as we go forward, we have an increasing capability to learn from the experience of real people and put the right guardrails
that's what
in
worries
place.
me. That's exactly what worries me. Is what you're saying is we have to have some failures. I don't want 13-year-olds to be your guinea pig. I don't want 14-year-olds to be your guinea pig. I don't want any kids to be your guinea pig. I don't want you to learn from their failures. You want to learn from the failures of your scientists? Go right ahead. Let's not learn from the failures of America's kids. This is what happened with social media. We had social media who made billions of dollars giving us a mental health crisis in this country, They got rich. The kids got depressed, committed suicide. Why would we want to run that experiment again with AI? Why not raise the age? You can do it.
We shouldn't want, first of all, we shouldn't want anybody to be a guinea pig. I think that regardless of age or anything.
Good. Well, let's roll kids out right here, right today, right now.
No, but let's also recognize that technology does require real users. What's different about this technology, and which is so fundamentally different in my view from the social media experience, is that we not only have the capacity, but we have the will, and we are applying that will to fix things in hours and days.
Well, yeah, to fix things after there's been, after the fact. I mean, I'm sorry, it just sounds to me like you're boiling it down. You're saying, trust us. We're gonna do well with this. I'm just asking you why we should trust you with our children.
I'm not asking for trust, although I hope we will work every day to earn it. That's why you have a licensing obligation.
There isn't a licensing obligation.
That's
right
why
now.
in your framework, in my view,
Well, sure, but I'm asking you, as the president of this company, to make a commitment now for child safety and protection to say, you know what? Microsoft is going to, you can tell every parent in America now, Microsoft is going to protect your kids. We will never use your kids as a science experiment, ever, never. And therefore, we're not going to target your kids, and we're not going to allow your kids to be used by our chatbots as a source of information if they're younger than 18.
but I think you're talking about, with all due respect, there's two things that you're talking about, and I think we're.
I'm just talking about protecting kids. This is very simple.
Yeah, no, but we don't want to use kids as a source of information and monetize it, et cetera. But I'm equally of the view, I don't want to cut off an 8th grader today with the right or ability to use this tool that will help them learn algebra or math in a way that they couldn't a year ago.
Yeah, well, with all due respect, it wasn't algebra or math that your chatbot was recommending or talking about when it was trying to break up some reporter's marriage.
Of course not, but now we're mixing things and.
No, we're not. We're talking about your chatbot. We're talking about Bing Chat.
Of course, we're talking about Bing Chat. And I'm talking about the protection of children and how we make technology better. And yes, there was that episode back in February on Valentine's Day. 6 months later, if that journalist tries to do the same thing again, it will not happen.
You want me to be done, Senator Klobuchar?
I just don't want to miss my vote.
There's other witnesses.
I don't want to miss my vote.
Senator Klobuchar.
Oh, you are.